Good morning all. Honorable dignitaries on the dais, Reverend Father Ajit Kudian, Principal, St. Berkman's College, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, Vice Chairman, Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur, Dr. Rani Maria Thomas, Vice Principal, Assumption College, family members of Professor George Joseph, dear teachers, and my dear students. The Department of Economics, St. Berkman's College, takes pride in honoring her esteemed teachers who played a pivotal role in advancing economic studies in Kerala. This morning, we have assembled here to fondly recall and celebrate the contributions of one such dedicated and talented teacher, Professor George Joseph. Our tribute to him takes the form of this annual Union Budget Analysis Lecture Series. The budget presented on 1st February 2024 was an interim budget before the general elections in April-May 2024. However, there are enough indications in it regarding the policy directions of the government. Apparently, many applaud the finance minister for having balanced fiscal responsibility with the growth aspirations of the country. Nevertheless, there were vehement criticisms leveled against the orientation of the budget. Critics point out that without investing in people, without creating a robust foundation of rights and social infrastructure, and without creating decent jobs, just riding on increased capital expenditure on mega infrastructure and corridors will not benefit the people at large. Today's budget analysis lecture aims to deliberate on the growth and welfare implications of the Union Budget 2024-25. First and foremost, a warm welcome to Reverend Father Ajit Kudian, our esteemed principal and the president of this gathering, who passionately supports all the department's initiative. A sincere and heartfelt welcome, dear Father. We feel truly fortunate to welcome Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, one of the most highly qualified academicians to analyze the Union Budget 2024 in our midst. Professor Chakraborty, presently the Vice Chairman at the Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur, has a diverse and impactful career. His previous roles include being the Director at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Chief of Social Policy, UNICEF, and Chief of Field Office, UNICEF for Kerala and Tamil Nadu, among many others. Professor Chakraborty played crucial roles in committees such as the Advisory Council to the 15th Finance Commission of India and Chairman of the Kerala Public Expenditure Review Committee. Additionally, he served as Economic Advisor to the 14th Finance Commission. His involvement extends to advisory positions, teaching and research, notably on GST, decentralization, and state development in India. He continues to contribute extensively through his publications, leaving a lasting impact through the national and international journals and publishing houses. Personally, I have noticed his professionalism through his timely responses since the beginning of my contact with him for this program. Dear sir, with immense joy, I extend a welcome to you for the Professor George Joseph Memorial Budget Analysis Lecture 2024. I welcome Dr. Rani Maria Thomas, Vice Principal, Assumption College, Changanasheri, and our dear alumni, who has readily agreed to share her fond memories of Professor George Joseph with us. Hearty welcome, dear Rani Miss. Our gratitude extends to the family of Professor George Joseph for establishing the endowment fund for this yearly academic event. We warmly welcome the family members Joseph K. George, Professor Jacob Thomas, Anu teacher, Dr. Elbin G. Jose to this gathering with wholehearted enthusiasm. A warm welcome to our former teachers of the department, whose contributions have built and elevated the department to its current status. We extend our greetings to our dear teachers, Dr. Joseph Kurian, Professor T.K. Thomas, and Dr. Philip MP, who are present here amidst us today. Hearty welcome, dear sirs. Lastly, a warm welcome to all other participants of the lecture, including the teachers and students from our department, teachers and students from other departments within the college, and those from institutions around the college, as well as our esteemed college alumni. You are the true recipients of the benefits from today's program. Wishing each of you a highly productive and academically engaging session today. I remain. Thank you very much.
I also fondly remember Professor George Joseph on this day because I can never forget his face, especially his smiling face. And whenever I met him, he was very lovingly speaking to myself, and his soft spoken words always make me feel that he is one of the greatest teachers of St. Berkman's College and from the Department of Economics. And his family members are here. We acknowledge his contributions to St. Berkman's College and the generosity you have shown to St. Berkman's College, the family members. Now, coming to my duty, that is the presidential address. Today, we have the budget analysis of 2024, Union Budget Analysis of 2024. Our Finance Minister proudly said that this is an interim budget and we focus India, a Vikasit Shrestha Bharat by 2047. And we are putting the pillars for this Vikasit Shrestha Bharat. That's why more importance is given to infrastructure development. Yes, when we go through the budget, though it is an interim budget, we can see lot of allocations, including the corridors, railway corridors and so on, mostly focused on the infrastructure development and thereby becoming, by the next year, the third largest economy and by 2047, one of the most developed countries in the world. We have a lot of plus points. That is, the strong government which is at the center, they can make policies and implement those policies with more power, and though it is democracy, they have, that means these elections have given them all type of powers to implement their policies. And they have defined, that means our union government has defined always what is next. That means, and that is the way they are making their target also. And that is good for India having the largest populous country in the world. And among that, I have read in some papers that 53% of Indian youth are under the age of 25. That means we can lead the world in different ways. So that's a great thing. But there are some other things which all have to be focused. that is that was mentioned in our welcome speech. That means social infrastructure development. That was not addressed well, I think, in the union budget. I have said in some speeches, that is our Nirmala Sitharaman's husband, Paragala Prabhakar, yes, he has written a book, and I have mentioned that book in one of my speeches, I think, yeah. And that is The Crooked Timbers of India. There, he has made some remarkable comments. That is, after 2019, 7.5 crores of people are shifted under below poverty line, or they are placed under below poverty line. And never the government has addressed such issues. And there are that type of remarks are there in that book, and where we are addressing all those type of crucial matters in our budget as well as in the economic policies of the government. So our chief guest, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, he is engaged in the field of development studies, and I think he can throw some lights to these areas of India's development. So I wish and hope that this day will be a beneficial day for all of you, both the students of SB and from other institutes including Assumption, and I wish to gain the maximum out of his talk. I wish all the best to this memorial lecture series. I remain. Thank you.
When Shinu Varkey sir asked me whether I could speak about George Joseph sir, I readily accepted the invitation. The reason is my relationship, or rather my family's relationship with Professor George Joseph was at 3 levels spanning 3 generations. My maternal grandfather and Professor George Joseph's father were first cousins. That makes my mother and George Joseph sir second cousins. My own father, who retired from St. Beckman's College Economics Department, Professor Thomas Kanemplavin, taught Professor George Joseph, and to top it all, I was a student of George Joseph sir. That's why I said the relationship with him is not that simple. It spans over 3 generations. It's indeed quite nice that the Department of Economics of SB College have organized an event to commemorate an exemplary person who was a student of St. Beckman's College, later joined the staff of economics, and left for his eternal abode. When I stand before you, several memories splash in my mind. When I joined for my post-graduation in economics here, George Joseph sir was the head of the department. And on the very first day of the public finance class, the professor introduced the very basic and the standard and the classic book in public finance. That is Public Finance in Theory and Practice by Musgrave and Musgrave. I think he taught public finance for many decades, and he was an authority in that particular field. And we very fondly used to call sir, not me, but my friends, Professor Musgrave. But it is a rarity that the professors introduce the classic works to students in modern times. But Professor George Joseph, he was very particular that the students who are mastering should have a clear and close feel of the classic works in the different subjects. Another thing which I always keep dearer to my heart is another incident. One day, Prof.George Joseph announced a full day special class on a Saturday. After 3 hours of lectures, it's not that we really got bored with the classes. His classes were really nice. But as students, we generally hesitate to sit for long hours at a stretch. So my friends told Sir, we didn't bring lunch today. But he didn't say anything. He went to the department, sat quietly, and his eyes were full. Such a humane, gentle, passionate, and loving teacher. He was a source of inspiration to all of us. The kind of motivation that he gave me is beyond words. So, as a professor of economics, we generally think of the contributions in academic field only. But he was an exception to that. He stood out from the other faculty members because of the fact that he was involved in not just in academic matters, but also in extracurricular, non-academic activities on the campus. He was the advisor to the college union. In fact, when I studied, he was not the advisor, but my brother who studied here, who was also a student of Prof.George Joseph, he told me that he was the union advisor. And as you all know, the things have diluted or changed over the years. But that time, there was aggressive unionism. And only people with real patience and special skills and abilities would be able to patiently advise the students on the various activities happening on the campus. And he did that. In addition to that, he was a trainer. He was a faculty in charge of the National Cadet Corps. He used to train the NCC students. And I came to know that he was associated with the Shakespearean drama club or center of SB College. So it doesn't mean that it's a monopoly of a single department, but an economics department faculty involving in primarily an English department activity is something which is praiseworthy. But one thing which I noticed was that whatever he does with utmost earnestness, sincerity, and that too quietly. He doesn't show off things much, but he does with a clear, genuine heart. So, as we remember George Joseph Sir today, I very fondly recall his life and services he rendered to this great institution as a teacher and also a builder of St. Beckman's College with joy and gratitude. I always pray and hope that his soul may rest in peace. I'm sure he will be in heaven praying for the Berkmanites and also for the institutions which are run by the Changanasheri Archdiocese. The topic for today's session is nothing else but the recent budget, the interim budget of 2024. And we have an eminent personality who has an expertise in this field to discuss the cross-sect and to give you a right perspective, an unbiased one with regard to the budget. And Pinaki Chakraborty, sir, is well known to not only to economics students, but the student fraternity and the faculty fraternity all over India and the world. And let me take the pride and privilege to welcome you once again to the St. Berkman's College and the family, because I am proud to say that though I am the Vice Principal of Assumption College and a Faculty of Economics of Assumption College, because my father is retired from SB College Economics Department, my brothers and sisters, we all had our studies in Berkman's College. So I'm also a proud Berkmanite. I like Berkman's, but I am in love with Assumption College. And I'm sure you will have a very productive time with Professor Pinaki Chakraborty's exposition and explanation of the budget 2024, and wish you all good luck. Thank you very much.
Delighted and honored to be here to deliver Professor George Memorial Lecture. I have been hearing about his contributions to the college, his contribution to the academics, his contribution to the development of the department. But above all, what I could feel, the kind of attachment you have with him is something outstanding. It's very rare to see these days. And I am very honored that I have been given this responsibility to give Professor George Memorial Lecture this morning. And I thank SB College Changnasheri, particularly I thank Professor Shinu Waki for inviting me to give this lecture. Now, I am going to talk about today on interim budget. So let me just first make a very basic yet a provocative statement, and that statement is that interim budget, though we call it interim budget, it is a vote on account. That means there will be a new government soon. That government will present a full budget, but this is a vote on account till that government comes. So Parliament gives approval, the government which is going for election, to run the government for the next 4 months, right? So in terms of expenditure. So tomorrow if there is no expenditure, how would I run the government as a finance minister? So vote on account is something like for the first quarter, you are given Parliament's approval to spend money from the consolidated fund. So as far as interim budget is concerned, its technical significance is that it is allowing you to spend money till the full budget comes. So don't attach too much of importance to what has been presented in the interim budget. Full budget is going to come in July after the new government comes in. The full budget can be the same as the interim budget, but technically interim budget is a temporary arrangement when the government goes to election, in the election year. So I am not going to talk much about budget proposals because these proposals are technically going to be over by the end of July when the full budget will be presented. So let us wait for the full budget. But why this budget is important, even if it is important, it is an interim budget, I would try to discuss that. I'll try to highlight certain key issues. Now, let us go back a bit. Think of 2021. 2021, we had COVID. The college must have been closed, right? So 2021 we had COVID, 21-22 we had COVID, 2 years of COVID, 22-23 there is some bit of normalcy, 23-24 we are okay. The pandemic sort of over, but what has COVID done to the fiscal situation of the world? That we must understand. When we talk about India's budget, certain proposals, etc., we have to understand this in the global context. Now, what is the global context? Global context is in 2019-20, if we look at global debt, so that means take all the countries of the world, something like 169 countries, 170 countries, I think, and you add their debt divided by their combined GDP, world GDP. What was the debt of the world? The total debt of the world, taking both households, that means individuals like me and you, non-financial public sector, that means not the banks, but the non-financial public sector, say corporates, so the local shopkeeper, and the government. So if we take the debt of the household, debt of the non-financial public sector, that means corporates and the households, corporates and the enterprises, which can be, may not be a corporate, maybe listed, non-listed companies, and then you have the then the government. If we take all these debts together, this debt used to be around 180% of GDP of the world before COVID. Today we are in a situation when the global debt, taking household, taking government and non-financial public, private corporate, is 239% of GDP. Today global debt is 239% of GDP. That means the debt of the world is 2.5 times more than the income that the world together produces, right? Now let us talk about India. India, before COVID, our debt to GDP ratio of the government, India doesn't have much household debt because Indians are net savers. Because all of us save, right? We all have a savings account, we all have some certificates, government issues. So India actually saves very large amount of money. So India's financial saving is something like 11 to 12% of GDP. So this is a big source of financing private investment in the corporate and also in the government. So Indians are net savers, not net borrowers like Americans. So if we are a net savers, in this net saving economy, if we see the government debt, because government borrows. So if you see the government debt today, before COVID was something like less than 70% of GDP. And today we are talking about a government debt which during COVID went up to 92% of GDP, and today we are talking about a government debt of around 85–86% of GDP. This is the debt of the government, this is not the debt of the public sector. So if we take public sector debt, the government debt will be 90% of GDP. Because public sector debt data is not available. So we have got a public debt which is around 90% of GDP. And how much interest do you pay on public debt? As a government of India itself pays something like 4% of GDP as interest payment. States together pay around 2% of GDP. Roughly speaking, it can be little more, little less. So if we say total GDP is 5.5% is paid by the government as interest earning, so what is then available for the government for spending on other activities will be much less. So 5.5% of GDP is paid as interest. And what is the total government expenditure? Center and states together, our total government expenditure is around 24% of GDP. So if 5.5% is taken out, then what remains? 24 to 18.5% of GDP. Now if you take defense expenditure is 2% of GDP. So what is remaining? 16% of GDP. From there, if you take out pension expenditure, it's around another 2% of GDP. So that 16% minus 2 becomes 14% of GDP. These are all committed expenditure. Now from that 14% of GDP, if you take out wages and salaries, which is around 4 to 5% of GDP, you are left with only 10%. So less than 1/3 of the total government budget is only discretionary, only developmental, only can have some critical development distribution. So that we are talking about a limited fiscal space, which is constrained by large debt, large interest payment, large pension liabilities, large wages and salaries, and other committed expenditures. So in such a situation, if we are talking about budget, whether it is interim budget or a full budget, we should look at what? We should look at the possibilities that can increase my fiscal space, my ability to spend more on development, rather than looking at individual schemes of allocation for schemes. So you always say, this has increased, that has declined. It's okay, something will increase, something has to decline, because it depends on the rate of growth. That's not budget analysis, to my view. What is important for you to understand as students is that what is the direction in which the budget is going. Now, in that context, couple of good things I must acknowledge here. If we look at the debt to GDP ratio, which reached at 92%, as I said, in the beginning of COVID, has declined now. So there has been a 7% decline in the debt to GDP ratio in a very short span of time. So that is something which is not easy to do when you have such large debt. So if we look at, debt has declined. But the problem here is the interest burden has not declined. Why it hasn't declined, I will talk about it little later. Second important thing, if we look at the tax to GDP ratio, because how much of the economy is taxed, how much of the GDP is collected as tax income, if we look at our tax to GDP ratio has increased by almost 1 percentage point in the last 3-4 years, since 2017-18. So if the tax to GDP ratio has increased, debt has increased, so there is some bit of a breathing space that the government has got, which actually resulted in the reduction in fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit also declined in the last couple of years. So what is then happening? So we had a very large debt, we have now declined. Interim budget says that it is further declining, and probably that trend is going to continue. If that trend continues, then we probably would have more fiscal space at the union level to spend on development. That's the first proposition that we can make, right? So there is no disagreement on that. Now, if we talk about, okay, what am I going to do with this excess fiscal space or the new fiscal space that I have generated by increasing tax to GDP ratio and by reducing, debt burden? So if we talk about that, we see that there has been a large increase in capital expenditures. So if we look at government's capital expenditure, that has rapidly increased in the last 4-5 years. So that is why all the time we say this government spends more on big infrastructure, big roads, connectivity, technology, but they are not spending enough on the revenue side. So they are not spending enough on education, enough on health, enough on many other things. Now, when we do that, because we are students and we have to be very clear on the framework of budgeting, if we look at, there are 3 lists in the constitutions. What are these lists? One is union list, one is state list, other is concurrent list, right? So ideally, when there is a budget presented, we would expect that union government will spend on the union list because that is the union government's responsibility. States will spend on state list because that is state's responsibility. And on the concurrent list, both center and states can spend together. Over the years, if we look at union government expenditure on union list subject has sharply declined. Why? Union government expenditure on union list subject has sharply declined because union government started spending a lot of money on state list and concurrent list subjects. Is health concurrent list or state list? Health is a subject which is in the state list. But if we look at National Health Mission expenditure over time in the last 20 years, the central investment has grown at a very fast rate. So, if we look at education, concurrent list, but primary education, mostly done by the states or the panchayats. But if we look at allocation for Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, has rapidly increased. If we look at rural employment, it's in the state list. But you have got a National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Why should we have a National Rural Employment Guarantee Act when rural employment is a state subject? So, lot of things happening where central intervention in a functional space of states is increasing, right? So I would always such hope and argue that if I am supposed to do my constitutional function, so I would first priority for me as a central government would be to spend on my union list subject appropriate to the inadequate quantity in terms of my volume of expenditure and priorities. Then I'll spend on, if necessary, in the concurrent list, but then on the state list. But it appears that the priority at the union level in the last 20 years have become more and more on the functional domain, which is at the state, which is in the functional space of states. So center is competing in a functional space which is predominantly of states. Why is center doing that? So when we analyze budget, we have to understand why center is doing that. It is not that center is doing it because some ulterior motive. Our center is trying to control states. I think there are three things that has happened when India liberalized, global economy liberalized. Three things that happened are, the role of government has dramatically changed. Why the role of government has dramatically changed? Government role has dramatically changed because governments, when they became globally integrated, the flexibility of taxation went significantly down. So if we say that India is going to have a corporate tax rate tomorrow at 40%, is it possible? Technically possible. But in practical sense, you cannot do it because if you increase corporate tax rate to 40%, the private investment flow that comes to your country will move to some other country because India, world economy is globalized now. So it can just move out from India to say Brazil or to South Africa or to China or somewhere else. So though we are sovereign, but sovereign tax policies have become not so sovereign, okay? Because of the global competition, because of the global, integration of financial markets, the ability of the government to pursue an independent tax policy have become extremely important, have become extremely limited. Second, if we are talking about globalization, we also have been hearing across the globe, not only in India, that governments are taxing the corporates at a very low rate. That's because everybody is trying to attract the same kitty of investment that is available globally, right? We always say that you come, there are malls. Maybe I don't know whether you have a mall in Chakraborty, but must be there in Cochin or in Trivandrum. And you go to this mall and then you travel to Delhi on a flight, get to another mall, you will not realize whether you are in Ernakulam or you are in Delhi Mall because it's the same set of shops, right? So you are trying to attract the same set of investment for a same set of goods and services for vast majority of population deciding in different jurisdictions of a country or of different or across the globe. So in such a situation, you really cannot have a very non-harmonized tax structure. You cannot say, I will have Armani suit in India, but I will tax Armani profit at 50%, but then Armani will look for his profit where it has to pay only 30% tax. So when you are not able to, not able to maneuver much on your taxes side, what would you do as a central government? Your only handle is expenditure. you would appear to be redistributive, okay? So that is where you see the central government having acts when redistributive expenditures are at the state level. So states are responsible for spending on education. 90% of the education expenditure is at the state level. 80% of the health expenditure is at the state level. But whenever budget comes, the focus is on how much center has spent on health, how much center has spent on education. So what is most important for us to understand is to protect, state's fiscal space and in a manner that center's action does not reduce that fiscal space of the states. So what are the actions central government has taken to enhance fiscal space at the state level? Now in the state level, central government in this year's budget have said that they will give 1,30,000 crore to the states as interest-free loans. And this has a bullet payment after 50 years. So what is interest-free loan? The 50 years later, 1,33,000 crore in real term will be what? Zero? If we adjust it for inflation, it will be zero, right? Or maybe negative. The real value of that 1,30,000 crore after 30 years, after 50 years. And they don't have to pay any interest. So this loan is nothing but a grant. So if you are giving a grant, why are you not giving it as a grant? It is a grant, no. You are not giving it as a grant because when you lend to someone, it appears on your asset side of the balance sheet. Isn't it? If the banks give me a loan, that will be bank's asset, right? My liability, because I have borrowed the money. So that shows an increase in capital expenditure. So if I treated it as loans, as grants, not as loans, my capital expenditure would not have gone up. Since I have treated it as a loans, which essentially is a grant, I am actually showing an increase in capital expenditure. Second important point here is, in this budget, again I am saying, so if you say that I will borrow for you and you got to spend efficiently that money, what incentive do I have to spend that money efficiently? No, why should I spend? I will go out and blow it up. I am given an interest-free loan and I have to pay it after 50 years. What incentive do I have to spend it efficiently? So it's not incentive compatible. So if you say that I am giving you interest-free loan and you increase capital expenditure, that capital expenditure increase may not happen because I have got no incentive to increase my capital expenditure. I am not saying that it is going to happen, but I am talking about possibilities. It might increase. But we are in economics is all about incentive, supply and demand, right? So incentive structure here is quite distorted. So if I am borrowing, I should pay for the interest. That's my incentive to make return out of that money. If I do not have that incentive, I would not bother about that investment. That's very clear, right? If my dad buys me a bike and I buy a cycle, I always be more careful about the cycle rather than the bike, okay? That's a fact of life. So the point is that the incentive structure is distorted. You actually may not get the desired result. So should that continue is the question we should explore as students. That is one. Second issue is, when you are talking about centrally sponsored schemes in this budget also, we have seen, MG and REG expenditure, it has slightly increased, PMGSY, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. How much this money cost to the central government? This is something like 1.65% of GDP. Now these are all grants coming to the states. And if these are all grants coming to the states and 1.5% of GDP, and 3.6% of GDP is interest expenditure. These are all current expenditure, and our current revenue deficit is around 2% of GDP. That means unless you reduce your interest payment or allocation for centrally sponsored scheme, you cannot reduce your revenue deficit. So should we consider as students and researchers allocation in centrally sponsored scheme from the point of view of whether it has increased or decreased, or should we consider it as a question of macroeconomic stability? Because if the macroeconomic stability question is not addressed, then we may have macro instability. And India has experienced macroeconomic instability in 1991. 1991 economic reform happened because macroeconomic instability is so high. So we should not get into that kind of unstable macro situation. So from that point of view, decline in debt is good. Decline in interest payment to GDP ratio is good. Decline in fiscal deficit GDP ratio is also good. But we need to reduce debt further at a sharper rate. We need to reduce deficit, especially the revenue deficit. So we should look at allocations from this allocation for these schemes from the point of view of macroeconomic stability, not in terms of how much they have been allotted in terms of allocation of expenditure. Because most of these expenditures are top-up expenditures. Because the primary expenditure on these schemes are at the state level. As I said, 90% of the education expenditure is at the state level. 80% of the health expenditure is at the state level. So we should increase state's fiscal space rather than you trying to doing it. States should do it more efficiently than the center. So that's the kind of reform that I would be, as a student of economics, looking for the budget, looking from the budget. So those kind of reform, those kind of restructuring is going to be extremely important. Now let me come to the capital expenditure. Now when we talk about capital expenditure also is a major issue where we haven't really understood the way capital expenditure happens. Again, it is not specific to 1 year budget. Please remember, when you analyze budget, please remember this, that what is country's capital expenditure by the government? I'm not talking about private sector. Private sector also make a lot of capital investment. So country's capital expenditure is something like, taken center and states together, is around 3% of GDP. And within this 3% of GDP, 3.5% of GDP, in that 60% of the capital expenditure until that interest-free loan started was at the state level. So center's capital expenditure was only 1/3 of the total capital expenditure. Now because of the interest-free loan, which will again be spent by the state, center's capital expenditure has increased. But who is the primary driver of capital expenditure? Primary driver of capital expenditure is again the states together. I am not talking individual states. States taken together spend 60% of the capital expenditure. So in such a situation, if we say that, center will spend on capital, states will spend on revenue, the data does not really tell you the proposition that you are making as correct. So if the states have to make capital expenditure, why state should be given that fiscal space? States should be given that fiscal space because the nature of state's capital expenditure is very different than the nature of capital expenditure center makes. Okay, so center makes a national highway. Okay, from here you want to go to Chennai, you reach, earlier it used to take 18 hours, now you reach in 12 hours. So that's the central's capital expenditure. But to ensure that that road is effectively utilized, the benefits of the central investment is effectively utilized, then you probably have to connect that road with the state highways, right? So that people can access that road. So when you do that, then only the real benefit of building infrastructure is felt, is actually realized. So if you really have to do that, who can do that? Benefit, this last mile connectivity of that road to the rest of the state can only be done by the state PWD departments. So state capital expenditure has to. So the multiplier effect of state capital expenditure is very different than the multiplier effect of central capital investment. So this is very, very important to recognize. Last issue that, how much time do I have? How much time do I have? Huh? 20, 25 minutes? Okay. Okay, I don't take that much time. Okay. So if we are talking about center's capital investment and state capital investment, you have to remember this: state should be provided adequate capital spending at their level. Now let us come to the other important aspect of the interim budget proposal. Interim budget has said that growth will be driven by capital investment by the center. Now I told you that growth can be driven by the capital expenditure of the center, but since 60% of the capital expenditure of is at the state level, and state capital expenditure has a different multiplier than the center, so we really cannot say that just by central investment we can have a higher growth. Probably growth will be even higher if we are able to allocate more capital expenditure ability at the state level, fiscal space for capital expenditure at the state level. This is important to understand. Now let me come to the other budget proposal. Budget said that we are the GST has improved in the last couple of years very significantly. That is true, and that is one of the reasons why SGST, the total GST, SGST, CGST and IGST revenue as a percentage of GDP has gone up. That has happened because of the simplification of the GST structure. That has also happened because of the technology that was introduced. So I think it is important in that context to see that GST revenue will increase in the near future also, and in turn would have an impact on the fiscal space of the states. Now, if we look at the central taxes, there are only 3 or 4 taxes. You have got CGST, you have got income tax, you have got corporate taxes. Now, corporate tax rate is one of the lowest in the world. Income tax rate is also one of the lowest in the world. It hasn't been changed in the last 97, 98 was the last change in income taxes. So the tax rate has not been changed. So that way it is very stable in terms of tax. But then what can improve our tax to GDP ratio? The only thing that can improve our tax to GDP ratio is further simplification. You really cannot reduce the tax rate. So if you are not able to reduce the tax rate further, then what can improve our tax to GDP ratio is further simplification of the tax procedures. So what are the simplification that tax procedures should do? One is to reduce tax expenditure. What is tax expenditure? Tax expenditure is the amount of revenue foregone because of exemptions. So a lot of exemptions are given to private corporate sectors. Individual taxpayers also get a lot of exemptions, right? People buy a house, you get interest exemption. You are given you invest in certain instruments, you get an exemption. Like by a national small savings certificate, you get 1,50,000 rupees exemptions. Some of these exemptions are not for tax purposes. They have got non-tax objective. So you are using tax instruments for people to buy house. What is the job of direct taxation? Direct taxation's job is to collect revenues because you are earning certain level of income. Now I am saying that I will use tax as an incentive for you to do certain kind of expenditure. So you are trying to change individual behavior or trying to achieve some non-tax objective through a tax instrument. Now, I am not going into the question of whether it is right or wrong, but the point that I would make here, when we bring in too many objectives in the taxation, say through taxation I will encourage you to buy a house, through taxation I will take care of your old age, through taxation I will allow you to buy a medical insurance, you are actually using tax for purposes other than taxation. Okay. So that can also has the complication of, that can make the tax system very complicated and reduce revenues. If you are actually talking about large tax to GDP ratio, which can give free health cover to everybody without an insurance, probably we should look for that. But in transition, what will happen, that we should think. Because we don't have an insurance, we also do not have a very high health expenditure. So these are certain issues where I am not saying that you should tax people more, but I am saying make tax simplified where you are able to generate more revenues without taxing people more. Too many objectives bringing through one, trying to achieve too many objectives through one instrument can really distort the tax policy. That is my simple point. Second issue is, globally, there has been a discussion that global economy is now talking about, OECD has talked about it, that global minimum tax on corporates. What is the global minimum tax on corporate that they are talking about? Any idea? They are saying global minimum tax rate of 15%. Now, you are actually, it's like this. You are saying a kid that if you are able to get out of 100, 10, you have passed. Okay? So when generally the statutory tax rate all over the world for the corporate is more than 20-25%, effective tax rate, if you say that minimum tax rate should be 15%, you are actually encouraging race to the bottom. You are not actually discouraging corporates not to pay taxes. They will always pay 15% tax and make profit without paying taxes. So this is happening especially in developing countries because of globalization. So corporations, India is kind of little less affected because India has its own large corporates. So, but if you look at small developing economies like Bangladesh, if you look at Sri Lanka, if we look at African Union, if we look at entire South and North America other than US, Canada, you will see that the corporate tax hugely benefited because corporate tax have been not evaded, it's avoided. There's a difference between evasion and avoidance. Avoidance is you use the tax law to not pay taxes because tax, and that you can do in a complicated tax structure. But evasion means it's unlawful, but avoidance is not unlawful. So tax avoidance is very high. Now, to avoid that tax avoidance, you said the basic minimum rate should be 15%. It should not have been 15%. It should have been higher. So what is most important to understand is, if we are really talking about increasing tax to GDP ratio, it's not about what has happened in the interim budget. We have to look at the process through which we have seen not a buoyancy, not a buoyant growth of revenues in direct taxes, in indirect taxes. So that is very important. Other important aspect where we need to take our budget understanding more, nuanced and critical is about transfer pricing. What happen? What the kind of transfer pricing rule happens? Thin capitalization. What is thin capitalization? This is happening in globalization. Let me explain to you what is thin capitalization. So I say I am a corporate. I am based in another country, and I have got global investment in various countries. So when I invest in India, I give my Indian company, which is my own company, a loan. I don't invest my profit. So I give loans. So when I give loans, I get a huge interest allowance because that's a loan. So that will be deducted from my profit. So when it is deducted from my profit for the purpose of paying income tax, many countries, big corporates just don't pay taxes, or whatever they pay is just nothing compared to the profit they earn. Because they say this is because this investment was made through a borrowing from the parent company, and this is the interest burden. This is avoidance. This is not evasion. So a lot of countries are now bringing thin capital. This is called thin capitalization. So you are capitalizing a country, but the capitalization is very thin. So this thin capitalization will have to be controlled. And a lot of poor, less developed economies, not like India, which is an emerging market economies, are the victims of thin capitalization. So these are the frameworks that you should look at from the budget, not those allocations where, whether it is increased, decreased. Everywhere, if something increases, something will decrease, right? You take the percentage of marks you have got out of 100, 3 different subjects. If you take a percent, because you have got something, in some subject you have got well, you have good marks. In some subject, even if you got a good marks, in terms of share, it will show a decline, right? So it is very important just not to look at the allocation. Allocation is important to understand what has happened. But what the process in the budget making, what are the directional changes that is happening in the budget from the macroeconomic point of view will be very, very important. The last issue that I would like to draw your attention to is the issue of excessive leverage. Now, what is excessive leverage? Excessive leverage is, as I said, that household debt has increased phenomenally. Now, who can actually talk about regulations of excessive debt? It can be the central bank. So here RBI, you see, they have very recently, you must have read in newspaper, they have said Paytm payment banks are asked not to, something happened. So they have been asked to control their business and all that. Their share prices have tanked. Why? So then NBFCs, non-bank financial companies, have been asked to increase their risk ratio from 20% to 25%. Because our household debt is going up. And household debts are what? These are, most of them are not secured debt. It's not that households buying a house which is secured, because you mortgage the house and then you get it. So you are making an investment, real estate sector growing, it is giving to growth. But if the household is taking a personal loan for current consumption, that is actually creating financial instability in the system emanating from the household. Okay? So this has got huge financial instability concern. So when we say that my country is excessively leveraged, which has happened in most of African nations, it has happened in Argentina, Brazil, it has happened in Latin American countries, excessive leverage of the household can lead to macroeconomic instability. In short term, it can increase growth. Tomorrow you can go to a car showroom and say that, look, I am paying this money, which I got from the bank as a loan, give me the most expensive car you have in your showroom. That can produce extra car. But in the long run, that can lead to financial instability. So you also need to check, when we talk about budget, how do you really reduce this? I am not saying loans are bad, but if you have a large unsecured debt, which is not against a guarantee, you are creating excessive pressure on the financial sector. And financial instability have wrecked countries after countries. I am not saying that we are in an alarming situation like this. India's household debt is very low, but our unsecured debt is going up because of credit card, NBFC is pushing for loans. Every day we get 50 calls from somebody to give us a personal loan. And also this is increasing consumption. So how much of consumption loan has led to consumption increase, and thereby growth is also needs to be understood. So quality of growth is very important. Is it investment-led? Is it consumption-led? If it is a consumption-led, what are the instability issues that are coming in? And how do we handle that? These are part of financial sector issues. These are part of budgetary provisions. These are part of issues of regulation. It's not only budget. So I think fiscal, monetary, external sector instabilities will have to be taken into consideration. And last point, and that's the larger point in the context of budget, India doesn't get affected by this. What will be the world in the next few years if we are talking about? I'll say certain, to my view, I may be completely wrong, so forgive me for that. First issue that we are facing at the moment in the world is the issue of global economic uncertainty. Why the global economic uncertainty? One is the Russia-Ukraine war, which has disrupted the supply chain completely, which has led to high increase in food prices. Now, if you look at 48 countries have 23% per annum average, I'm talking about food price inflation. Food price inflation is above 23% in 48 countries. So this is not a small thing. Second thing is, the countries who have given large fiscal stimulus to their nations, especially the developed countries, emergency response for saving lives, creating vaccinations, etc. was only 5-10% of the total expenditure. Rest of the money was spent on economic recovery. But if you look at a poor African country like Somalia, or if you look at South Africa, which is middle income, prosperous compared to other nations within the African region, you will see the stimulus was only around 2 to 3% of GDP, and 70% of the stimulus was on emergency response. So there was nothing spent on economic recovery. Now, if we look at the fund flow to these countries, who gives them fund? It is the external commercial borrower. External commercial borrower actually give them money based on the credit rating. And you will see these countries are suffering from a constant decline in their credit rating. So fund flow is not happening to these countries. India does borrow externally. That is why I am saying that Indian budget is completely financed by its own people. So we borrow from our domestic sources, we also collect taxes. So India doesn't have external borrowing. So that's the one major strength of Indian budget. Now I am saying that if we were to borrow this much of money from outside, our macroeconomic instability would have been of unmanageable level. So since it is domestically financed, we are quite okay. So I think strengthening these issues, these macro fundamentals will also be extremely important going forward, because there is always temptation to borrow from abroad because it appears at a very low rate of interest, because these commercial borrowings are, at a very low rate of interest, but you carry the exchange rate risk. Look at the dollar depreciation in the last 5 years. Dollar depreciated by more than 20%. So even if you borrowed at 2%, you would have had a 22% rate of interest now because of the depreciation of dollar. So it is always important to not borrow from the external sources. So that is another strength that India has in terms of its public finance structure. But going forward, I would say that we must consider having an understanding of the general government view. So to conclude, I would say 4 things will be very important. One is, as I said in the beginning, we need to reduce our debt to GDP ratio. As per the FRBM Act, we should bring it down to 60%, and we should aim for that in the medium term. And the Government of India's budget 24-25 said that they are going to bring down the fiscal deficit by 25-26 to 4.5% of GDP. I hope the debt also comes down. Second issue, fiscal transparency. Lot of up-budget activities happen. The borrowing happens outside the budget. I think we should have a fair understanding of that off-budget liabilities. Third issue is that excessive leveraging of the economy can bring financial instability. So for the macro policy, both financial sector and the fiscal sector policy should ensure that we actually deleverage. We should not allow excessive leveraging. We are not a highly leveraged country, but we should not allow excessive leverage. That can create huge financial instability emanating from the household sector, cannot be controlled if it happens. So but we don't have that problem yet, I am saying, but this is very important to watch. I think that is why RBI has done all this. I'm from the macro point of view. The fourth point, I would say that it is very important to reduce the committed expenditure. So interest payment, borrowing, interest payment, pension, wages and salaries as a percentage of total GDP, I am saying. I'm not saying that you should not pay wages and salaries, but what I'm saying is it is very important to understand its budgetary incidence cannot be as high that it cannot be, there is no resources left for other expenditure. So that's very important, but that's not much of a central problem, it's more of a problem of the states. Last issue, I would say that we have got 2 major fiscal risks, that is power sector. Power sector DISCOM's debt in this country, which is in the DISCOM's account, not in the state's account, is 11 lakh crore. So if this money comes to the state budget or the center budget, their debt will go up by that much of amount, okay? So it is very important to reduce power sector losses. Kerala doesn't have that problem because you don't have major power sector losses. So that DISCOM debt is very important. So off-budget fiscal liabilities will have to be controlled. So that's the general evolution, right? And last point, I think our FRBM Act, given that COVID has created such a major shock, major shock, and worldwide there is a new discussion about, what should be the new framework of fiscal responsibility. I think we should talk about that new framework of responsibility and have a new path for fiscal consolidation, given that there is a high increase in debt, high increase in interest payment, high increase in deficit, etc. So I stop at that, and thank you for the opportunity.
So my question, I have two questions. My first question is that you said that the union government is spending more on the subjects which are in the state list and concurrent list. So, sir, is it good for the decentralized setup of the nation? Is it good for the decentralized setup of the nation? That's my first question. And the second question is, after the union budget has presented before the parliament on February 2nd, many states have mixed responses. The state of Tamil Nadu, the state of West Bengal, the state of Kerala, they were reluctant to appreciate the budget. Okay. Sir, and the finance minister of Kerala, Sri K.N. Balagopal, has made a comment that there is nothing for the capital expenditure development for Kerala. There is no new IITs being set up or there is no fund for setting up IITs in Kerala. So my question is that, is K.N. Balagopal's argument right or not regarding to the fiscal situation of Kerala, that the GST collection, the central government is not giving much financial setup or financial support to the state of Kerala? Is it right or wrong?
Whether it is good for the center to spend on state list and concurrent list subject. There is nothing wrong in center spending on state list and it is about relative priorities. That is one. Second point I wanted to ask, I want to say, you must look at the 14th Finance Commission report, the chapter on new framework for federalism, where it has been clearly said that center should try and restricts its intervention on state and concurrent list subject for schemes that are national in nature and has got large externalities. For example, if we say that vaccination is a national priority, all the kids will have to be vaccinated. If center or COVID vaccination is a national priority, it has to be done. But if we say that center is going to spend on, we will run the primary school in a panchayat in Kerala, that's not feasible. So the choices will have to be very, very critical when we say that how much one can intervene in state and concurrently subject. But it is not, it is centers as a national government has the right to spend on state and concurrently subject. It's about relative priorities. And in that context only I said that given that center has large revenue deficit, these choices will have to be a restricted choice. It cannot be, and too much of centrally sponsored schemes certainly is going to create less decentralization, because then it is the center which is spending on areas where states are supposed to. So there is also conflict with the process of decentralization and federalism. So that is second point. Now the point on capital expenditure about what has been individually allocated to the state of Kerala, I see that all the states have that grievance that this particular scheme or a particular institute has not been set up. That happens all the time. I really do not know. But if we look at the loans, as I said, interest-free loans to the states, so that interest-free loans to the state is also available to the to the government of Kerala. So that would come to the states. So central government does not make capital expenditure state-specific, but overall budgetary allocation, the large part of capital expenditure will be on areas which are primarily on union list. And these are issues that can also be addressed through a budget, even if it is not a budget announcement, this can always be done because if you see the aims that have been there, new aims, IITs that have been there, I think it's all about negotiations and bargaining with the central government. So these are not very, these are not going to change the overall volume of capital expenditure, because overall volume of capital expenditure is 11 lakh crore. To set up an IIT, you probably need 100 crores. So in 11 lakh crore, 100 crore is a very small amount. I think any time that would come to Kerala. So I think those are not issues. Issues is the directional thrust. Where is the directional thrust of the overall budget? That is where I was trying to say that even if the center spends on capital expenditure, it cannot be the substitute of the state spending, because state spends more than 2/3 of the capital expenditure of the center and states together.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening lecture. Sir, I have two questions. Sir, I have two questions. My first question is that our government is targeting to reduce our fiscal deficit to 4%. And if we have a stable government in the next time, or if the third Modi government is going to come, can the government to reduce the can the government achieve the fiscal target in 4%? And my next question is that sir said that as a vote on account budget, in this budget we have no more tax reforms. But if in the full budget coming after 4 months, can we expect a major tax reforms, especially in new regime? More deductions can be expected. That's my question.
Well, I don't know. As far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, I think the directional change in terms of its yearly reduction is very impressive. So it may achieve 4.5 by 25-26. But that's more important point is the debt ratio. I think our debt ratio is 82-83% of GDP. So this reduction in fiscal deficit is not going to bring down the debt to GDP ratio to 60% of GDP that was supposed to be achieved in 2022-23. But that because of COVID, etc., that has happened. But what we need is a faster reduction of debt ratio. Then only our interest burden will come down. And what will happen after the full budget in terms of tax policy, I really do not know. I don't want to guess at this stage.
Sir, I have one more question. So that our education sector allocation is reducing year by year in this Modi government. But my question is that the government is visioning a Vikasit Bharat, and this declining allocation trend in education sector in this time, particularly in this time where the students are, our local students are searching for foreign universities for education. In this time, the IIT and IIM allocations are reducing. Is that, sir, how you interpreting this trend of the government?
No, I think education expenditure declining, I don't know, I haven't looked at the education expenditure, but education expenditure in detail, I was talking about broad macro aggregates. But I think what has happened is investment in education in general and investment in education through budget are two different things. Because investment in within education, investment through budget has two dimensions. One is by the states and one is by the center. So as far as center is concerned, I would expect center to spend more on national institutions, you know, like IITs, IIMs, you know, research, and which has got large scale nationwide, maybe global externalities. So that is very important. But when we look at the total education expenditure, a large sum is for Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which is primary education. Now, primary education is generally done by states, much better than probably center. But this was done because some of the states, I don't want to name, some of the states were lagging far behind in terms of their educational achievement. The center intervened in the late 90s. Now, this has become a trend. And I think the money allocated is too small compared to the money that is spent by all the states together. So that is where I was thinking that it is about enhancing state capacity, enhancing states' priorities for education would increase state public investment in education. But there is also a large private sector growing. And how much is that investment? We have got no idea yet.
Good morning, sir. So my question is, do you believe that this interim budget of 2024 has effectively addressed the equality and social justice concern? And in Indian opinion, what urgent economic measures are to be taken to address the 40% of unemployed youth in India and also to increase the low work participation of women? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think when it comes to budget has talked about inclusion, I think then budget has talked about innovation, infrastructure and skilling, right? Now, I am not very concerned or very enthused by budget announcements, okay? What I would always like to look at as researcher is what has happened in terms of policy implementations and in terms of allocations. So that is very important. Just by announcement, we really cannot say that skilling has been done, employability has increased. This is one. Secondly, on the employment front, given that our total investment in the country is around 29% of GDP, I'm talking about gross fixed capital formation. In that case, and in that the government expenditure, government investment, public investment is around 4% of GDP. Rest is household and private sector investment. And what has happened is over the years, since 2011-12, our private investment has steadily declined. Today, what is the level of private investment? Private investment is around 19-20% of GDP. So unless private investment picks up and becomes at least, and the total investment ratio goes above 35%, this high unemployment rate is going to persist because public sector will not be able to provide jobs with 3.4% investment. And if public sector makes 20% investment, then public sector will have a huge debt and deficit. That's not possible. That will lead to macroeconomic instability. So if we talk about budget going to address the issue of employment, that's not possible. Budget cannot address the issue of employment. Budget has to create an enabling framework for private investment to pick up. Unfortunately, because of several reasons, including COVID, private investment is still very subdued. So with a subdued private investment, you really cannot have high growth of employment.
Okay, sir. In the last union budget, our finance minister had said that the income tax rebate has increased to rupees 7 lakh. And later in a press meet, she said that an annual income of about 7.27 lakh will not be taxed. So could you please explain about that?
Exemption limit has been increased, right?
Yes, sir.
There are now two processes, right? One is that you take all the exemptions and then you get a lower tax rate, and then there are two ways to calculate income tax liability. One is you don't take any exemption and there is a flat rate of, I think, 15%. And then you take certain exemptions, then you are taxed according to the slab. So I think we should not have two options for income tax. I think to simplify the tax structure, we should have only one option. Which option is better, that one has to see. And this is just an increase in the exemption limit. So that has been done because, inflation has gone up. So sometimes governments do change the exemption limit. So it's not a major change.
Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is regarding the tourism sector of our country. So in your lecture, you talked about more involvement by the state, physical activity by the states in their areas of domain. But in cases of mismanagement by the authorities or the governments, do you think disinvestment or giving more ground to private parties could go a long way in boosting the tourism sector of our country?
No, private sector cannot be the alternative of the government, no. So government has a certain role to play. Now, what is the limited role that government should play and what is the unlimited role government should play is a matter of debate. There cannot be a convergence there. So if somebody thinks that government should do everything, that's a view. But I think government should be responsible in areas which has got large redistributive consideration. See, if government is not there in the redistributive sphere, then inequality will really increase at a very fast rate, okay? Secondly, government needs to provide goods which have got large externalities, like education, health, quality education, quality health. So we cannot create a divide in the society where you have government schools where quality is very low. I'm not talking about Kerala, but in many parts of the country that is true. And then you have parallel private school where you have got students who are really doing great. Does it mean that the students who go to public schools are not good? No. So it is important to make investment in education, and it is also important to provide quality education in government schools. So that's very important. Health, roads, rural roads, connectivity, decentralization, federalism. These are the core of a diverse country like India. And these areas, governments, the national government has a large role to play.
Good morning, sir. Firstly, I would like to thank you so much for delivering such a wonderful session. And sir, before going to question, I have to address certain facts that while analyzing the budget allocation to agriculture sector, government is allocating certain amounts in the budget estimates like 1.27 lakh crore of this budget. But when it comes to the expenditure levels, that amount is not up to that of the estimates. Even it does not equals to the budget estimate or the reversed estimates. And the budget estimate for the agriculture sector had a huge surge after the announcement of PM Kisan Samman Nidhi by Piyush Goyal, which accounts for 50% of the allocation for the agriculture, fisheries and subsidies. And now even the government statistics itself says that the schemes fund are not properly transferred to farmers only. So my question is, how this inappropriate allocation of funds or mismanagement of government bodies affecting the agriculture sector and can you put forward some suggestions to tackle these issues?
I don't know. I haven't looked at it very carefully. I have no idea what has happened to the allocations. But larger question is that what is the BE and RE and actual difference in the agricultural sector? That needs to be looked at, because budget is a statement of intent. It's not an actual expenditure. It has not been spent. It will be spent during 2024-25, right? So a lot of time the intent, if it does not translate into accounts, actual expenditure, you will see large deviation in what has been allocated and what has actually been spent. So you must look at if these deviations are very large in case of agricultural sector, for which actual data is available. That means spending data is available. These are allocation data. Allocation is not spending. I am intending to spend. So you should look at 2021 and data
yes,
before that.
So while analyzing that year's expenditure, it is not up to that level of the estimate. So how this allocation gap is affecting the sector?
No, that happens for several reasons. One is certainly what was allocated was not spent because probably government decided in the media that they will cut expenditure on this, control fiscal deficit. This can be the department decided not to spend this much money. This can also be the fact that there was unrealistic allocation which they knew that they cannot spend. So what is the reason for that? It's very difficult to find out from an actual, from this deviation. Well, that one has to study. But again, agriculture is a state subject. Central allocation is very small. The total agriculture spending is around 2.5% of GDP. In that, more than 2% of GDP is spent by the states, not by the center. Center should do research on agriculture. Center does not have to, give money to the farmers. That's not required.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we have come to the close of this program, it is my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks to all those who have contributed in one way or other to make this program fruitful. Let me make this opportunity to thank the president of this function, Father Reggie P. Kurian, Principal, St. Berkman's College, for his constant support and presence. Thank you, Father. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Dr. Rani Maria Thomas, Vice Principal, Assumption College, Chakraborty, for joining us today and for remembering our dear Professor George Joseph. Thank you, ma'am. We had an extremely useful day. We have learned a great deal from Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, Vice Chairman, Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur. We are greatly encouraged by his gracious presence and immensely benefited by his informative lecture on the Union Budget 2024-25 and the interactive session that followed. Thank you, sir. Let me express our deep sense of regards and thanks to Dr. Shinu Varki, the head of the department, and Dr. Pavanam Thomas, President of the Economic Association, for being instrumental in planning this program and leading the faculty team in organizing it so effectively. Thank you, Dr. Shinu, Dr. Pavanam, and all other colleagues. Special thanks are due to Dr. Jacob Thomas, Head, Department of Commerce, Self-Financing, for serving as an external expert for the Professor George Joseph Memorial Budget Paper Presentation Competition. Thank you, sir. Finally, let me thank the family of Professor George Joseph, all the students, particularly the organizing team, all the participants of Professor George Joseph Memorial Budget Paper Presentation Competition, former teachers and friends of the department present here. Thank you, everyone. I remain.